Pride event organizers are getting unbelievably greedy, and it's the reason events are becoming increasingly elitist, ruining our community from the inside. If you've been to a Pride event in the past couple years, you'll start noticing how food is getting extremely expensive, where a burger that would normally be $10 is now $15 or $20. A shirt that would normally be $15 or $20 is now $30, and so on. It's not because vendors want to charge so much. Vendors like us would rather lower our prices so we can sell to more people. But event organizers force everyone to raise their prices because they're getting so greedy. So today we're explaining how and why all that happens and just how bad Pride events are hurting the LGBTQ community. For context here, my husband and I run a small business called ProfessorPride.com, where we mostly sell smaller Pride items like pins, cloth fans, and our self-authored LGBTQ books. Over the years, our audience online has suggested we expand to more Pride events, further away from our main office, and so we keep trying desperately. But we keep running into the same issue. Pride event organizers being greedy and not really supporting the LGBTQ community. So this past week, we reached out to our international audience, asking other small business owners and nonprofit organization leaders if they experienced the same issues, to see if maybe this was just us or if this was something community-wide. Overwhelmingly, we found our experience was far from the only one. A majority of vendors told us they experienced the same trend occurring, where these so-called nonprofits running these events treat vendors unfairly and sometimes even discriminate against our own community members. That's a stark contrast from the love is love anthem our community tells others that we possess. To best explain how this is happening and why our community is suffering right now as a result of Pride event organizers, we're going to cover these 7 elements: racism, vendor fees, nonprofit treatment, entry fees, main stage greed, corporate sponsors, and greedy contest. But before we jump into all that, I just want to lead this by saying not all Pride events are bad actors here. Some, like Schuylkill Pride Fest and Berwick Pride in Pennsylvania, that we love going to every year, have shown us amazing examples of how well an organization and an event can be run. But others have shown us the worst in our community. And we'll be drawing on examples from each of these and the experiences our audience has shared with us for our episode today. Let's first talk about discrimination. My husband and I have been to many events as a vendor and even more as a guest over the years. But whether we're attending Capitol Pride in Washington, D.C., a predominantly Black community, even when Congress is in session, a Pride in a predominantly Asian community, or one in a small town, we cannot recall ever seeing more than 2 or 3 Black or Hispanic vendors at any event. We saw one Mexican restaurant at Reading, PA Pride, but when you consider 22.6% of Reading is Hispanic, but yet only 1 out of the hundreds of vendors there was Hispanic, that's not proportionate to the area. At another event, one inner-city STI testing truck had an all African American staff, but no matter what event we go to as a vendor or guest, we have never once seen a single Asian vendor, even when attending Pride events in predominantly Asian communities. It got to a point where we started looking online at other events in different states, and even then, it's difficult to come across vendors that aren't white. And look, I know I'm a white guy saying this, but it's sort of weird to never see any vendors that aren't white. I know racism is a problem in the LGBTQ community, so why are Pride events not doing a better job to showcase how to overcome it by including different types of vendors? Perhaps these communities are just not applying to be vendors, but that would beg the question, why? You mean to tell me no Black, Asian, or Hispanic people run queer businesses or organizations that would want to attend a Pride event with hundreds or thousands of people attending? It doesn't make sense why no one would apply. Secondly, we need to discuss vendor fees because they've gotten insane. And it's the reason your food and everything else at events have gotten crazy expensive, way higher than inflation. When we first started doing Schuylkill Pride Fest, The event organizer gave us a vendor space for free because we broadcast the entire event. But even when we turned into a normal vendor, the fee for a 10 by 10 space was just $45 years ago, and it remains the same price in 2024, even after the event moved to a much larger and much more expensive venue to rent. Nowadays, they have a corporate sponsor list, but the vendor fees remain the same and they still have free admission. But other events have gone up massively. This year, you might have heard about Utah Pride because they're a prime example of what if all the shit hit the fan at once and what if the event organizer was the one to sling all the shit in the fan in the first place. In the past 10 years alone, the organization running their event, named Utah Pride Center, has changed leaders 13 times. In 2022, small businesses paid $450 to $500 for a 10 by 10 foot space. Online, they say it was a 4-day event, but it appears to us, according to their schedule, that the vendors were only there for 1 day. The other days had a parade and other educational expos. But in 2023, the same booth space, for what appears to be only 1 day, remember, would cost you $1,500 to $2,000. And still, even with vendors paying 4 times the price for the same amount of space,
in 2023, the center spent $1.5 million more than it had in the previous year on the festival. Now, because their revenue wasn't significantly higher, this left the organization in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt.
This showcases that Pride events are now more about making money than to help the community celebrate who we are and who we love. Prides have turned into a massive business. And even in Utah, one has to wonder where all that $1.5 million really went. And fun fact, this past month when the former chair of Utah Pride Center stepped down voluntarily, guess who became their new chair? They would never choose the 2023 event director who spent $1.5 million more than what they brought in on a single event in 1 week, would they? They did exactly that. That's exactly what happened. And this is not an outlier by any means. We asked business owners and nonprofit leaders in our audience around the world to share their experiences in a recent survey. And 42% of them say they've seen Pride events charging over $1,000 or more for a 1-day event. 75% of them said vendor fees were over any reasonable amount for a single-day event. As we've tried to take our booth to different Pride events in Pennsylvania, we've seen vendor fees that were sometimes $300 or more for 1 day. And recently, we applied to be a vendor at Pocono Pride in Stroudsburg, PA, which is a few hours away from our office here, but we were led to believe they only charged $50 for a vendor space, so we applied. But then a few weeks later, when they approved of PBR being a vendor, they sent us an invoice for $75 because they, quote, only have room for 125 vendors, and they received twice as many applicants. It appears to us that they raised the vendor fee because of how many applicants they had, and conveniently at the same time, they got rid of their entire vendor page on their website, so no vendors could check the application to see if maybe we misread something. Now, you might assume even $300 is a small cost to pay to be a vendor at an event and sell your products. But there is no way these are profitable for businesses. Let's take a vendor fee of $50 and see how much you'd have to bring in to break even, meaning before you make your first profitable dollar. So here are the expenses. The vendor fee is $50. You'll spend about $20 or $30 in gas to get there and back if it's within an hour of your home. You'll want some water to stay hydrated all day, so add a few bottles of water. At some point, you'll get hungry, so budget at least $15 for lunch. You're going to want some sunscreen to protect yourself from getting sunburned or skin cancer someday, so don't forget to include that. Many of these events require you to have liability insurance, and it's a good idea to have on your own anyway. So it's less likely you'll get sued if someone gets hurt in your booth or from misusing your products when they go home. Most times, $1 million coverage costs about $300 per year, and you can divide this by however many events you do per year. Because we have an online store and operate year-round, we divide that number by the number of days in a year. On the way home, you're going to get hungry again, so add another $30 for some pizza or a quick bite on your drive home. Finally, add staffing fees. You should never ever run a booth by yourself because you'll have products and, way more importantly, you'll have a cash box on your table that anyone could just walk away with if you have to use the restroom or go to get something to eat or drink. So you'll need to have at least one more person there with you. Luckily for me, my husband and I run our booth together, so my staff cost is free. But if you have employees, add their hourly wages, workers' comp, health insurance, and whatever other benefits you offer them to this list of expenses. Even without staffing fees, we're already spending $131 to be there as a vendor, based on a $50 vendor fee. Now factor in your cost of goods sold. Most businesses operate on a 33% scale. For example, if an item costs you $1, you're going to be selling it for $3. That's because $1 goes to buying it, another dollar goes to all of your other expenses such as credit card processing fees, staff, cost of displays and advertising on your table to help draw in the crowd and sell that item, and things like that. And finally, the third dollar is for your profit. But hold on, that third dollar has to first pay for the $131 cost in being there that day for that event, before you can put any dollar in your pocket and say you earned it. Basically, take the 131 and multiply it by 3. Operating under this basic business principle, it means you have to generate $393 before you can start earning any profit. Divide that number by the total hours of the event. Let's say the event is from 12 to 5 p.m. Well, now you have to bring in at least $78 per hour in order to not lose money that day. And some events just don't have the crowd for it. This gets exponentially worse the more the vendor fee is. One of our fans wrote in that they paid $300 for a vendor fee, but only brought in $800 that day, which even on the lowest of estimates means they lost about $343. For events like Utah Pride, you have to bring in $6,243 before you make a single dollar in profit, a whopping $1,248 per hour. And it gets even worse for food vendors, who most times are charged 3 to 4 times as much as any other retail business at Pride events for the same square footage. But most times, food vendors have staff, a food truck with massive expenses to run, and let's not forget, if they don't sell enough food, the food goes bad. Unlike when you're selling books or shirts, food is perishable, so being a food vendor is an incredible risk. This can cause immense pressure for businesses to make sales, and causes many small business owners to pressure their guests into buying anything, just so they don't lose money. If you're not earning your hourly rate to keep you on track to earn something that day, it's upsetting. And as a vendor, you cannot take that out on your next guest walking into your booth. This algorithm and the insane vendor fees these places are charging anymore are the main reason why many small businesses just trying to get off the ground cannot afford to go to a Pride event anymore, or shortly thereafter go out of business entirely because they're losing money. And that's the reason why many Pride events nowadays are more like corporate conventions than actual community events. That brings us to our third element, unfair treatment of nonprofits. Not everyone cares about making a profit for the day. If you're there giving away brochures and business cards about your clinic or nonprofit, there is no doubt you should be able to go to events like this and help our community. And that is not what I'm talking about here today. But event organizers regularly treat nonprofits way better, and some of them clearly don't fit into the nonprofit category. Most times when you're applying to be a vendor, you'll notice the fee for a nonprofit is vastly less than a for-profit business, or sometimes even free. Now, there are costs involved in renting a venue, paying fees to block off the street, paying for security, etc. Most times, up to 90% of these total costs will be paid for thanks to sponsorships. But that leaves just 10% of the cost for vendors to pay for in order for the event to happen. In theory, this 10% gets divided evenly by the number of vendor spaces you'll have available. But then, how come for the same 10 by 10 space, nonprofit vendors are paying $25, For-profit small businesses like ours are paying $50, and food trucks are paying $150. Shouldn't the expenses be divided evenly between all of the available vendor spaces? And everyone, no matter if they sell food or if they're a nonprofit, pay the same price per square foot. Why do food vendors have to pay vastly more than other businesses who also sell products? Just because they sell food instead of books. That's not to mention we've seen dozens of nonprofits over the years selling products at their booth too. For example, the Human Rights Campaign asks for donations in exchange for something sold. They can sell some of the same products that we do for the same profit, but bring home a vastly bigger profit margin because their vendor fee was half of ours or sometimes free. That brings us to our fourth element, entry fees. While some events are too small to ask vendors to pay a fee for being there, they can make up for it with an entry fee from every guest who wants to attend the Pride event. This is best exemplified at Berwick Pride in Pennsylvania. They don't charge vendors any fee, but they charge every guest who comes into the event just $5 to enter, which is completely reasonable. This way, they're incentivized to bring in a crowd, and they can easily recoup their cost of hosting the event. But vendors like us don't have to risk nearly as much to be there. For other events like Reading Pride in Pennsylvania, they charge vendors $60 or more for a space, $15 to even apply to be a vendor, regardless if you're accepted to be a vendor or not, and still charge every guest who walks in the park $5.64 to attend the event. Other events like Utah Pride, oh yes, the event charging $2,000 for each vendor space reportedly also charges each guest who attends their event too. Look, vendor fees make sense because the event costs money to run, and vendors can recoup this cost if the fee is reasonable, and if they have the right products to sell. Ticket entrance fees also make sense for smaller events, where the risk would be too great for a small business to pay a vendor fee, or where the event organizer thinks they can bring in a large enough crowd to pay for things that way. But any reasonable person would think charging both vendors for the space and attendees for entering the space is greedy. Not to mention, anytime you charge an entrance fee of $5, let's say, that means every single person walking into the event has $5 less in their pocket they can spend at any of the booths or donate to any nonprofits. When the vendor space is free, we understand we might get less money for the day, but we also spent less to be there. When you're charging vendors and attendees, we know you're not really putting on the event for the good of our community. You're lining your pockets with cash while our community and organizations all suffer. But speaking of organizations, let's talk about the fifth element, main stage greed. You might think some big corporate sponsor who pays thousands of dollars to have their name on the main stage the entire day is paying the expenses of that stage. For example, to hire a lighting and sound company to run the equipment on stage and pay for the performers. Drag performers usually only get paid whatever money they can collect during their performance from the audience, much like you would tip your server at a restaurant. This means they are under constant pressure to go around collecting money rather than perform. Live bands are most times unheard of at smaller Pride events, even though live music from LGBTQ artists would draw in a much larger crowd than some other main stage events. And worst of all, we've sometimes seen Pride events asking local DJs to provide lighting and sound equipment for the all-day event for free, even though they had a corporate sponsor putting their name on the stage. Imagine asking a DJ to set up their equipment, be there in the hot sun, risk their equipment if it rains, and then ask them to keep repeating a sponsored name over and over, knowing that company paid thousands, but the DJ didn't get a penny of it to do their professional job. Again, this does not apply to the events I mentioned at the top of this episode because I'm friends with their DJ and know that they get paid. But overall, this is insane, and it shows you just how greedy Pride events have become. That brings us to our next element. Let's talk about corporate sponsors, because if nothing else ruined your Pride event yet, they will. Having a large sponsor pay for their name to be on the main stage, or in exchange for some social media advertising, is fine. If Amazon wants to open their wallets and pay $10,000 for a Pride event, they should get a little recognition for that, no doubt. But when you have a Dollar General or a Walmart setting up their booth directly next to small businesses, you're asking for trouble. First off, we've been placed directly next to a corporate booth before, where they're giving away silicone bracelets and other smaller items. This directly takes away sales from smaller customers. Businesses are always told to have items at smaller, medium, and larger price points to sell to any guest, no matter if they're a young child with only a few dollars in their pocket or if they're a rich person with plenty of disposable income. So when you have a corporation who can afford to give away hundreds of dollars of items, those giveaways can directly impact the smaller $1 to $5 sales of small businesses all around your event. Worst of all, guests come up to us all the time and start walking away with things because they heard from their friends that a vendor is giving away bracelets. So when they see our booth, they assume it's us giving them away. And then we look like the assholes for stopping them and asking them to pay. And look, I'm not saying don't have giveaways at your event. Certainly you can, but just make sure that those don't coincide with what everyone else is trying to sell. This also hurts nonprofits because they are under a lot of pressure to give away larger and larger items to compete with the corporations. This costs them a lot of money that they sometimes don't have. And I get these corporations are paying a lot of money. But while Comcast can afford to set up a 40 by 40 foot giant display that takes a crew of 10 people hours to set up, it makes everyone else look like garbage standing next to them. Vendors spend a lot of money and time designing their booth perfectly to their brand. And there are a lot of great examples to show here of some of our friends. Even here at PBR, we pride ourselves on being professional vendor space designers. We even have a masterclass on ProfessorPride.com showing you how to be a successful vendor with professional branding. Our booth is meticulously designed to maximize space. Just for the banners, signage, frames, and tables of our booth, without even including any products on them, it cost us well over $1,500 and took years to perfect. But even that can't compete to a Comcast booth. They paid some company tens of thousands to design for them, giving away backpacks and standing a whopping 20 feet high. It gets so much worse though. Sometimes these events don't look a gift horse in the mouth. You might be asking why we ask permission to help events advertise when we have such a large audience comparatively. Well, first off, not everyone watching our show supports our community, and we want to ensure they're ready for that in case it occurs. And secondly, you would not believe the number of Pride events who have sent us cease and desist emails for simply hitting the share button on Facebook to share their event to our pages. In their letters to us, they have explained how it's their event and they will do everything by themselves without any help, or how offended they are that we would even remotely think that they need anyone's help. But it amazes me the number of times we give the help, lots of people show up as a result, and PBR is given a vendor space on the outskirts of the event, or sometimes even in the woods, down a dirt path with an event volunteer standing at the entrance of that path telling people not to go down there. By the way, thanks again, Reading Pride. We really appreciated it. It's a big slap in the face to not only our organization and our audience, but it's a backstab to the help that we just provided them, so we never go back. It gets so much worse though. Earlier we spoke about Pocono Pride, but the same Pride event is currently advertising a contest for any graphic designers to design a t-shirt for them. If you want to design a shirt for them, you need to provide them with the Adobe Illustrator file you created, so they can print it on hundreds of shirts and sell them at their event. You might wonder, like we did, what's the prize for spending hours working on a design in the world's leading graphic design software that cost $500 per year to subscribe to? Well, you get to see your graphic design on hundreds of shirts at the event that they sold. That's it. No cash prize, no royalty for every shirt sold, no free vendor spot at the event to sell your other graphic designs, barely any recognizable exposure, nothing. And the reason I know that is because earlier this week, Powered by Rainbows entered that contest. We took all the highlights of Pocono Pride and mixed them together, from their desire to take advantage of graphic designers to leading people to believe they changed the amount they're charging vendors for a space, and who could forget their weird phrasing in their statement to us that was basically corporate talk for, if you're too poor to pay the vendor fee, we have 125 other businesses on call who are dumb enough to pay it. Now, for legal reasons, I have to say they mentioned in their statement to us that, quote, proceeds from the event are put back into the local LGBTQ community. But since that could literally mean anything, including buying more copies of shirts they can turn around and sell again, we decided to enter our design in their contest. The front of our design features Pinocchio because it sounded so close to Pocono, and we feel it fit their personalities. We even came up with a new slogan for them: Pride and Greed, all you need is 5 more. The back includes a picture of Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob, changing the prices on his menu board, with a direct quote from their staff when we asked them for clarification on how their vendor pricing appears to have changed. Then we included, but not the artist who designed this t-shirt, we made so much from them, with another picture of Mr. Krabs counting his money. All of the text is in Comic Sans, and the worst color scheme any graphic designer could choose, because I feel that matches their personalities too. It's all on a black t-shirt to make everyone wearing it uncomfortable. And Pocono Pride, don't worry about those copyrighted images of Pinocchio and Mr. Krabs because it appears to us you don't really care about those sorts of things anyway. If you take a close look at your actual Pocono Pride logo, you'll notice it looks nearly identical to Utah Pride's logo, an organization which was founded and from what we can find online started using this logo 22 years prior to Pocono Pride existing. I'm not saying you stole it, but it does sound like hiring an artist was, how did you put it to us again? Quote, outside of your budget. So how do we solve these issues? Well, event organizers can accept more Black, Hispanic, Asian, and other vendors into their events to show a more diverse community. They can offer fair pricing so all nonprofits, craft vendors, and food trucks pay the same rate per square foot at a reasonable fee, because these events are not intended to fill your pockets with cash. Sure, take corporate sponsors, but limit the number of them allowed at the event with a booth, or limit the size of their setup. Perhaps limit the types of items that are allowed to be given away as swag, as to not interfere with craft vendors. Ask vendors where they prefer to be placed, so vendors who prefer to have conversations with their guests don't have to scream over a sound system. You should have LGBTQ bands, artists, authors, activist speakers, and even educational programs, so allies can learn more about our community, and kids can understand how normal they are, or the next steps to finding resources in the area. Pay your drag performers so they're not begging for tips. And pay your DJs because, as someone who's run sound and lighting for 4,500 live events in my career, trust me when I say it's not an easy job. Finally, realize that events like this are not about you as organizers. They're a way for our community to celebrate. But also realize in the small towns or wherever you're from, people who may not understand our community might take that first step in coming to an event like this to learn more about us or support their newly out child. Do you really want this to be their first impression of our whole community? Do you want them walking away from your event remembering how rude you were, how expensive everything was because of your policies, remember, or how overrun your event was with corporations? That's why you need to do better. You're representing the whole community worldwide here, and that's a big responsibility. Right now, you're failing in my opinion, and hurting the community you keep swearing to us that you love. So if you really loved our community, you need to do better. As always, if you want to showcase your pride this summer, check out ProfessorPride.com, where we have everything you need, including a full master course showing you how to design a professional vendor booth and increase donations or sales. Anyway, I am of course your host, Professor Pride. Have a gay day, everyone, and bye for now.